Hey everyone and welcome to Storytime. My name is Jake and today we are going to be looking at the subreddit r/prorevenge, where people tell us their best stories on when they got revenge on someone or something they didn't like. If you're new around here, please do hit subscribe down below so that you never miss out on another video. But for now, let's sit back, relax and enjoy some pro-revenge stories. How I got my bully arrested for a completely different thing. My story begins 5 or 6 years ago. I was coming home from school. I was 14 to 15 years old. My commute included catching a bus from its last stop. The last stop of the bus was like a cul-de-sac where the bus turned around, waited for 10 to 15 minutes before it would go, while the driver had a rest and the passengers got on. I got on the bus and stood in the middle. There were a lot of people already on it and all the seats were taken. When I looked outside, I saw 3 boys, slightly older than me, sitting on a bench, looking aggressively at me and talking. One of them was looking straight into my eyes. I will call him main aggressor. I could tell they were talking about me and straight away knew they had bad intentions. This goes on for about a few minutes when the bus engine starts. Just before the doors closed and the bus set off, they got on. The main aggressor came right next to me and looked me right in the eyes about 2 inches away from me. I turned away and got to the front of the bus near the driver. Scared, I wanted to phone my father to wait for me at the bus stop, but my phone bill wasn't paid and my phone was useless. Just one stop before mine, they suddenly go off the bus and ran away, looking back at me. A few weeks later, while going to school, I catch a different bus, which set off from the same place. As the bus set off, I saw the same 3 guys outside. Main aggressor notices me right away and yells at the others, "Hey, that's that guy." They started walking towards the bus, but it drove away. The 3rd time I saw them was the scariest. It was like a year later. I was coming home on a Saturday evening on the first bus. The bus was almost empty and I was sitting in the back. I saw the same 3 guys getting on the bus from the front door. My blood ran cold. They hadn't noticed me yet, and I immediately rang my mum and told her to wait for me at the bus stop. I was looking out the window, pretending to not see them. They were messing around at the front of the bus when the main aggressor noticed me. He smiled to the other 2 guys and walked up to me. Standing next to my seat, he started saying things like, "Nowhere to run now," and "I finally got you," while pushing me. I didn't say anything and pretended he wasn't there. Luckily, my stop was coming. As the bus stopped, I suddenly got up and ran to the door. He tried to grab me, but failed. I ran out of the bus and got in my mum's car, which was already at the bus stop. I looked back and saw all 3 of them getting off the bus and trying to chase the car. My district is small, and I found the main aggressor on social media and knew who he was. A typical aggressive teenager and wannabe gangster. Heard from a few friends, he was a well-known bully in our district. I was a very shy and timid person, so the experience stuck with me for quite a long time. For 1 or 2 years after that, I was afraid to go near the bus stop or walk alone in the dark. I would always look around in fear on buses or when walking on the street. The revenge part. Fast forward to a year and a half ago. 20-year-old me started a job at a construction company. I became a friend to most of the workers, including the foreman and the boss. They all liked me because I did my job well and was generally friendly. I was working hard because I needed money, which helped my progress in the company quickly. I started as a construction worker, cleaning the construction site, carrying around materials, assisting form workers and rebar workers, etc. But about 6 months later, the foreman started giving me more complex tasks as well. About 2 months ago, we were removing formwork with 2 of my colleagues when the foreman came up with another guy and said, "This is our new guy. He will be working with you. Show him around and take care of him. It's his first job." When I looked at him, I was shocked. It was the main aggressor. Surprisingly, he didn't recognize me. Probably because my appearance changed a lot since 5 years ago. But I hadn't forgotten his ugly face. Didn't give him any info about me that would make him remember. He wasn't into talking a lot anyways. I didn't tell anybody about him because I felt that it was nobody else's business. At the moment he didn't do anything wrong, but I just couldn't stand him and wanted to get rid of him ASAP. We have a storage at our construction site which held expensive tools and machines, drills, angle grinders, etc. One morning, we came to find it broken into and there was missing equipment. There is one security guard, but his kiosk is on the other side of the construction site, next to the entrance, which was about 50 meters away, and his view to the storage is obstructed, so he didn't see anything. There was security camera footage, but it was low quality, and the two guys visible were wearing dark hoodies. Police were called, but there was nothing they could do. The next day, I come home from work. One of my dad's buddies has stopped by to show him the new handheld circular saw he'd bought secondhand for cheap. A bell immediately rang in my head. When I saw it, I instantly recognized it. I took a picture of it, saying that I was interested in buying a similar one. My dad's friend told me who he got it from, and after another check on social media, I found it was main aggressor's father. It all started coming together. I told my boss and foreman everything I knew and showed them the picture of the saw. My dad's friend also confirmed it to my boss that MA is indeed the son of the guy he'd bought the saw from. Me and my boss went to the police and told them everything. The next morning, there were two officers on the construction site. When main aggressor showed up, they arrested him. The sweetest part was me telling handcuffed MA, "Nowhere to run now." He thought about it for a second and looked at me with wide open eyes. He suddenly remembered who I am. Anyway, under pressure, he told the police everything. Turns out, his father persuaded him and one of his friends to steal the equipment. His father would then sell it and they would split the money. I don't know much about his father, but main aggressor is held on multiple charges, including theft and trespassing. I also heard from a friend that he's been arrested before for assault, but they let him go. This time, he's not getting away. Sometimes I feel bad for him, but then I remember what a douchebag he was and still looked to be. Maybe there's something else to it, but I'm still really confused as to why they went after this guy at the start. All he said that was he looked at him and then came and said, "Oh, you've got nowhere to run." But why? Was it just for jokes or was there something else? But what about the inheritance? So, this is a long old story involving my mum's aunt, all circulating since my mum's mum, my grandma, passed away. Note to this story, I will refer to them as my aunt and uncle as it's the only names I've known them, and this is an important note on why money ruins families. So, background on my grandma. My grandma was the result of her parents getting together before marriage, when it was not acceptable, which forced my great-grandparents to get married. Growing up, there was a lot of resentment to my grandma and a large amount of abuse, which did carry over to my grandma's brother, who was the golden child, and I know as uncle. My grandma was pretty much told as soon as she was old enough, she needed to get married so she'd no longer be their problem. As soon as my grandma turned 18, she got married into her own abusive marriage, where, instead of beatings, he was drunk, who took all of her money and her parents didn't care. As soon as my grandma left him, she is left with nothing and had to go home to her parents' beatings instead. During this time in her life, her own parents make it aware that once she was married, she was her husband's problem and had changed their wills, so the only person that would get any money should they die would be the uncle. My grandma is upset, but accepts it anyway. Take 10 years later, my grandma is remarried to my grandfather, who treats her right, but they struggle to have kids, whilst her brother is married to his wife, who is gloating that each time my grandparents come home after having a stillborn, she has a perfectly healthy baby with each nursery for said child paid for by both grandparents. Just after the last gloat, my grandma gives birth to my mum, and both uncle and aunt worry about the inheritance after great-grandfather health takes a swan dive. Great-grandfather passes away, and apart from a cheap pocket watch my grandma gets, she's left out of the will or any money given, whilst uncle is literally gloating about how he can afford his dream house. My grandma cuts a large amount of contact out through the amount of hurt they are causing. Fast forward now 15 years, and my great-grandmother's health is in real decline, and uncle and aunt are talking about divorce as they have spent the money great-grandfather had left them, and her own parents' money. My grandparents were freaking out at this point about her declining health and making sure she's not in pain, whilst Aunt openly says she hopes she does pass away as she needs cash. Yup, classy people. Anyway, great-grandmother, before she passes away, tells my grandmother that she hadn't wished to change her will to leave her out, but had been forced to, and handed her a wad of money, telling her that while she still wishes my grandmother had a better mother, she had been the biggest mistake in her life. My grandmother got her final happy moment with her mother, but also a kick in the balls. My aunt and uncle hadn't been there at all, so when they finally showed up, they are taking claim to items and saying, "Nothing must leave the house until this will is sorted." Here comes the part of the title. My grandma is the only one to try and sort out some sort of funeral for her and hope the will would allow her some cash to bury her, but as you've guessed it already, aunt and uncle make it clear they are in charge of the will and anything to be passed around. They take charge of the funeral, pretty much shoving my grandmother out, and to add insult to injury, shortly after the service, they informed my grandma that she had been left nothing in the will and how great-grandmother hadn't bothered to include her for anything at all. Just a general note here, my mum during the service had gone to my great-grandmother's house and had broken in to take a couple of items she knew my grandma wanted, which was 2 photo albums, a few small rings, and 2 small statues, so my grandma actually gained some items from it all. My grandma did try to see if she could fight them to get anything, but pretty much gave up and just cut complete contact with them, especially after they refused to attend her own husband's funeral. So, fast forward to a giant time skip to 2019, and I'm 10 going on 11, with no idea really who aunt and uncle are, apart from they send us a Christmas card once a year, and occasional birthday card, but my grandmother's health is really deteriorating. My grandma pretty much knew her time was up and had spoken more openly about her upbringing, her family life, and who her uncle and aunt were. Turns out, uncle had tried to reconnect when aunt left him once again, over money problems, but since himself and aunt had reconciled, my grandma left him to his own death sentence, but uncle knew grandma's health had really gone downhill once again. Anyway, my grandma happens to suffer a stroke at 78, and along with having diabetes and pretty much being blind, my grandma knows her time was coming to an end quicker than we all wanted to accept. She made my parents aware that under no circumstances were we able to accept aunt and uncle into our lives, as aunt had been trying to call her more often under the impressions wanting to ensure my grandma had a will. Shortly after my grandma returns from rest care, my uncle visits her and attempts to pressure her into changing her will to ensure he is made in charge, as his opinion, "Mum will not cope with the pressures of planning your funeral and sorting out the house sale." My grandma had apparently agreed and was only stopped from doing so when she asked my dad to take her to an appointment to change the will. She told my dad her master plan, and my dad takes her to the appointment. Fast forward to the end of August, and my grandma's health rapidly declines in 24 hours, to the point where she was happy and healthy to being in the back of an ambulance. She is rushed to the hospital and manages to survive another 24 hours before she passes away. My mum had informed uncle and aunt of my grandmother's condition, but they refused to visit at all. And this sends my mum into meltdown that she was alone in the world with 2 young children having to cope with planning a funeral. 3 days later is actually the first time I meet aunt and uncle in the flesh. They wanted us to discuss my grandma with my mum. Now, this is a little blurry to me, however, I do remember my uncle being sad about her passing away, and he did play with mine and my sister's Lego blocks with me and my sister, whilst aunt did question into why grandma had died so soon, and also if we knew if there was any cash left to them. My mum, whilst upset, answered as many questions as she could before forcing them out as they were upsetting her further. So my grandma's funeral had to be set so it would be either held on my birthday or my aunt's son's birthday, which are 2 days apart. My parents had to choose aunt's son's birthday as they didn't want it to be on their oldest daughter's birthday. This set a bad mood for the day as they tried to inform aunt and uncle of this news, but it had been ignored completely. The service was held, And before it could even start, my aunt is pressuring my parent to allow myself and my sister to sit with her side of the family. My parents kept us to their side of the family and started ignoring them. After service is when this finally blows up. We had a small get together afterwards where people came around to celebrate my grandma's life. A lot of her friends made big deals out of my and my sister by giving us a memory box of possessions they had that reminded them of my grandma. This had just been given to us when Aunt starts boasting that Uncle has the power of the will and they plan to take a certain amount for all the stress it caused on them. Joke's on them though, my dad asks which copy of the will was in the case, to which they reply the last copy she ever made. See, if you remember from further back, my grandma had changed her will with my dad being there, and this is where my dad slams down the power moves. The changes had been to give my mum and dad full control, a small amount to be set aside for me and my sister, and the grand total of 10p to be given to aunt and uncle. Oh, and if they contested the will, they got nothing. Nothing at all. As you can imagine, being told that they blew their lids, swearing and upsetting the kids in the room, and I remember being shuffled upstairs as my mum and dad kicked her out. Anyway, Aunt being a douche, she contests the will and loses the grand total of 10p, left to her and my uncle. My mum, by then, had sold off a lot of possessions she didn't want to keep, and the house sale had been pretty much finalised by the time my uncle came begging for items to remember my grandma with, or to be given a small amount of money that was rightfully his, as surely his sister wanted to leave him something in the will. My mum laughed him out of the house, and that was the last time we actually saw either one of them. Why did I write this now though? Well, it turns out in 9 years of being little to no contact, my uncle had died during the summer for us to only find out at Christmas via a Christmas card. Don't worry though, he was surrounded by loved ones, as Aunt so gracefully put it, but neither of them had much money left. For his funeral, his children had to beg, borrow, and steal the cash to afford his funeral. And in the Christmas card, they asked if we could give them some money. My mum couldn't say goodbye to her uncle, but did get to make a lovely bonfire instead using the card. The moral of this story is, you may not get to choose your family, you do however get to choose who you call family. Wow, the move that the dad did when he wrote the final will, that was such a power move, I respect that loads. Hey everyone, I hope you all had a really good day and that you enjoyed that video. If you want to check out some other videos, then click on screen right now, or check out the playlist down below. If you enjoyed that video, then please do leave a like, and if you want to submit your own stories, then you can do so by joining the Discord in the top link in the description. But thank you so much for watching, and I will see you very soon.